I'll also ask you to pop your questions and comments for our panelists in the Q&A icon box on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you can put your questions in, if you've got comments for our panelists, please, throughout this next hour together, let's get the conversation going in the chat, via the Q&A, via the polls. And without further ado, let's get started. So welcome Ontario, welcome Toronto, BC is here, Eastern Townships, London, Boston, John Abbott is in the house. We've got India in the house as well, and I know it's quite late in the day there. So thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and let us know what it is that brings them here today. What is your role, and why is it that you are passionate about this topic that we're about to discuss today? So Vinay, would you get it started for us, please?
Sure. Thank you, Maureen. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are from. I see there's somebody joined from Philippines as well, which is kind of very admirable because it's probably way past midnight. Thank you for joining us. My name is Vinay Chaudhary, and I'm the CEO of Worldwide EduConnect, which is a company which offers in-country recruitment services in different parts of the world: South Asia, Philippines, Vietnam, China, and Africa. And I've been in the sector for 15 years. Started as an international student myself in Canada back in 2002 when I did my MBA from Western. But here I am, very passionate about international student recruitment primarily. And as everybody in the industry, I share the anxiety about the things that are going on. And I thought it would be a good idea to kind of brainstorm with some of my colleagues on where this industry is going.
Thanks so much, Saurabh.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Maureen and Pai, for inviting me here. So my name is Saurabh Malhotra. I am the CEO and founder of Student Direct. Previous to my role at Student Direct, I've had almost 15 years of experience working in the public education side of things. Most recently as the director of international market development at Fanshawe College. International student recruitment is, I like to say proudly, is all I've done. That's the thing I'm most passionate about in my life. So with Student Direct, what we're trying to do is help institutions come up with a direct student recruitment and engagement plan. That's been my focus for the last 6 months, and I look forward to this awesome conversation today.
Thanks so much. And Andrew.
Yeah, hi everyone, Andrew Champagne. I'm work with Colleges and Institutes Canada. I've been with the association for about 7 years, working primarily on student mobility related initiatives, both inbound and outbound, supporting, in some cases, leading some of the government relations and advocacy work that we do here as an association, really representing publicly funded colleges, institutes, polytechnics, CEGEPs across Canada, and really helping to facilitate and really make it easier for them to welcome, host, support, train students for immediate and long-term success in Canada and around the world. So very happy to be here with my colleagues Saurabh and Vinay, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for quite a number of years now.
Well, it's so great to have all of this expertise in this virtual room with us to let us know what's going on. What do some of these policy changes mean for the state of IE in Canada, and what can folks at institutions do to help future-proof for what's going on now and for whatever may come down the road for us in the future. But before we get into all of that, let's take a look at the polls and see where folks are at. Also want to say hi to Montreal is in the house, and Vermont as well. So lots of folks tuning in as we get going from across the world. So let's take a look at our first poll question, shall we? Do you think your institution is adequately prepared for future educational challenges? So I'm going to invite you all, if you have not, please weigh in and let us know, is your institution prepared for what lies ahead? All right, we can never have predicted some of the things that we have had to deal with in the past 5 years, this year. Who knows what's coming down the road? So the overwhelming majority of folks who have voted, as you can see, panelists, say no. Their institution is not fully prepared for challenges that may come ahead in the future at 82, almost 83%. Okay, those are some big numbers, folks. So let's get into it. I've got some questions for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so that our guests today can leave with some strategies, with some information about what they can do, maybe some action steps about how best they can prepare for some of these future challenges. So, Vinay, I'd like to start with you if I could, and ask you about some of the most significant trends in international education recruitment that you are currently seeing, and how do you anticipate that these trends will evolve over the next decade? In particular, if you could discuss some of the emerging technologies that are top of mind for us, AI, VR, that we can perhaps use in student recruitment, we'd love to hear about that as well.
Sure, Maureen. There's so many things happening. To be honest, I see that like when I started in this industry 2010, from there till almost 2018, nothing changed, like almost. And then suddenly, things started moving, and then COVID happened. And then now I think we have moved kind of a next phase, which is a completely new phase, nothing we have seen before, especially in context of Canada. The other countries might have seen some of those downs, but for Canada, this is something very, very new. Uh, and when we talk about, the factors, underlying factors, there are so many things that are happening. There are changes in student behaviors where students are getting more assertive, there's more awareness about what's happening around the technology. As you said, it's completely different. But the interesting thing about technology is it's not the speed of how technology is changing. It's actually going to be the speed at which we will absorb that technology or adopt that technology, which, to be honest, I think is not going to be that rapid, especially in public institutions. We are very conservative. We have made it an investment. So I don't see that happening in the recruitment side as much as I see in the delivery of curriculum, the big impact. But then there is also, of course, there are geopolitical trends. What's happening in US, what's happening in Europe right now, all is going to impact us. And then, of course, something that is top of everybody's mind is the public policy, which can be both a biggest enabler or a biggest disruptor, of all the trends. So, so if you look at all these things together, again, it's very difficult to see the future, but in the next 5 to 10 years, what I can see is that there's going to be a major disruption before the rebuilding that happens. So next 2 to 3 years, I would see there's, the numbers going down rapidly, people panicking, a lot of institutions are struggling to get students, and then we will come to the building stage. Every country goes through these cycles. But I also see, the PG certificate might not even exist in 10 years, maybe even 5 years. That is possible. I see a much higher level of collaboration between institutions and the local government, universities and colleges, especially in context of Ontario, which has not taken place in past. We have never seen that kind of collaboration. We have seen it in BC, but not in Ontario. We'll see the consolidation of agencies, student recruitment agencies. I think 70% of the agencies will not exist in the next 5 years. Again, that's a prediction with some risk, but I think that would completely transform the way we are recruiting students. We will see a lot of innovative pathways, especially in healthcare and trades, that are going to be adapted by Canadian institutions. We will see fee discounting, which has never happened. So institutions competing for the same student, which will again, bring in a lot of benefits for the students. And uh, another thing which I feel, I'm not happy about, is also lack of diversity. So I do see a lot of institutions moving to a safer markets where the cost of recruitment is low. So that might impact, especially in the next 5 years. We will see that before again the rebuilding starts. So these are kind of few things that I see happening. Again, it's very difficult to predict.
Yeah, I have to say, I find these crystal ball kind of questions really fascinating. And since our crystal ball is out, gentlemen, the other gentleman in the room, if you'd like to weigh in on this as well and let us know, what do you see? Vinay has mentioned a lot of different predictions, both current trends, what's happening now that's impacting the sector tremendously, as well as perhaps what's coming in the next 5 years, 10 years, or even less than 5 years. So, how do these predictions sit with you folks? And do you have your own to add?
Yeah. I'd add something. I'd go back to the poll question, Maureen, that you had put in, and how prepared do you think your institutions are? I think the most important thing is people, like, we don't even know what's going to happen. Like, they're predicting something's going to happen. No one was predicting these things that have happened in the last 6 months. And for me, the biggest blow has been the messaging used by the policymakers specifically around Canada. And that is something that is way beyond any policy that happens. But I'd say, just to add to Vinay's predictions, I would just say, especially about agencies, I do believe agencies are very in tune with what the market needs. I always feel like agencies are more in tune with what the source market needs than the recruiting countries. So, for example, in Philippines, in the last 6 months, with a lot of the changes that have happened, a lot of the agencies have moved to Australia quietly, although there aren't many good news in Australia as well. In India, we are seeing this move to Eastern European destinations. So they're very resilient, but I think I agree to the broader point that there will be consolidation, and there'll be kind of different things that they need to do too. The biggest change overall, I think, is supply and demand. Canada has never seen a time where the demand was in question. Right? Like in the last 15 years, I should not say ever, but in the last 15 years, we've not seen a time where demand was in such a big question. So it'll be a challenging time for sure overall. So I'll just add that.
Yeah, you mentioned resiliency, and I think that's something that I think all our colleagues in the room with us would agree with. That's something that we've had to show as a sector over the past, particularly 5 years. And what's that going to look like as we move ahead? And what are some strategies? I'd love to hear some strategies around resiliency as well, and building institutional resiliency as well as sector-wide resiliency. So thanks for bringing up that important point. And also, Vinay, you got a comment here about your piece and your predictions, and every bear curve comes with a consequent boom. So really great point with that tech piece, and including in your comment as well. Andrew, any other predictions you'd like to throw into this mix, or any comments on your colleagues' predictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of predictions, I'm going to bring a little bit of perspective from a national and maybe subnational view here in Canada. And what I find very interesting and kind of fascinating about the context we're in, while I think there's very much a need and an imperative for us to be looking at innovative ways to collaborate, certainly at a national level, referencing some of the messaging. How do we get our put our best foot forward as a sector, not just when speaking to the federal government, but to the population more generally. I mean, there is a national dialogue, a national conversation that has started in a more obvious way in Canada around international students, international student recruitment, support, success, etc. And we do need to sort of galvanize around this as a sector and make sure that we're highlighting the multidimensional benefits of international education. But also, I think that the context is such that, we will likely see a little bit more competition in some ways, certainly at provincial levels, where provinces have been brought into this conversation in a very significant way. Perhaps not necessarily in the way that they would have liked to, and sort of how that was done. But I think, there are going to be questions and real efforts that will need to be made to really keep Canada's national brand alive and well, and at the forefront of the work that we do internationally, where, provinces will be looking more closely at what their specific labor market needs are, how they can differentiate themselves from others across the country as well. competition is never not a bad thing, and that can lead to interesting innovation and perhaps benefit students in some ways. So I think it's going to be a space to watch in terms of how we collaborate, how we compete, and how we innovate at the various levels of government here in Canada.
Yeah, a really interesting dynamic between collaboration and competition, given what's going on in the sector right now in Canada. So thanks for bringing that piece up, and then to sort of tie this all together. Thinking about what you all have said and shared as far as what's going on currently, what you expect is going to be ahead of us. That collaboration is going to be more important than ever. Resilience is going to be more important than ever. And the way technology helps us collaborate and become more resilient, I think, is going to be a real key to this puzzle. So thanks so much for your comments. Meanwhile, more people have weighed in on the poll, and we're still at nearly 84% of not feeling prepared enough for what's coming to your institution in the future. So, Saurabh, I want to talk to you, because I know you have been in an institution for a very long time. And in fact, when we first met, you were working in an institution. And I want to ask you how the international student recruitment has evolved and how it continues to evolve. And in particular, are there things Canadian institutions can implement to reduce the cost of recruitment?
Interesting question, Maureen. Thank you for that. So, as you said, I spent a lot of time creating and managing the international enrollment strategy for an institution. And I think coming back to the point I previously mentioned, it'll be an interesting time. It'll be a challenging time. Till date, for the last decade, especially in the last 5 years, the only thing that really mattered for institutions was having the product, which was programs, having the availability, and honestly being in Canada. So those were things that kind of propelled institutions to really good numbers. Almost all institutions did really well. Now, of course, some institutions did some things better. For example, diversity, some institutions did better than others. Programming, in tune with labor market, what Andrew was referring to, some institutions did better than others. But overall, all institutions did really well because of these factors. And I'd like to say we haven't been tested enough, the Canadian institutions in the last decade. And this is the time when we are being tested. So the agent recruitment model, which most institutions, if not all institutions, use, is something which it's proven. It's worked for institutions for a long time, and it's something that institutions rely on for, depending on the institution, for 70 to 90% of their recruitment funnel, right? And I think that when the demand is in question, when our brand might be in question, I hope it doesn't. I hold the Canadian brand really near and dear to my heart. That kind of outsourcing the brand to third parties might not work as well as it has till now. So, for example, the messaging that institutions need to go out with now is not that Canada is a great destination, come to Canada. It will be, Canada is a great destination for these careers in these cities, come to Canada, it's still a great destination. So the messaging will be more complicated, and that's when I believe institutions need to be more in charge of their messaging and their recruitment funnel. I would say that out of like 200, 300 institutions that are recruiting actively in Canada, my dire prediction would be, I would say 30 to 50 will keep doing well. There will be institutions who will not do as well as they've done. All institutions might go down, but some will still stay, will still be better. And I think what that will look like is coming up with new ways of doing things. You also asked a question about the cost of recruitment. I actually think the cost of recruitment will be going up. It's not going down. Because the demand is in question, everyone is looking at ways we can incentivize agents, and in many cases, rightly so, to get us the demand. But if we want to be successful in the medium to long run, we also have to look at, not saying don't do that, but we also have to look at ways we can strengthen our offering, we can strengthen our expertise in recruiting students, independent of a third party, independent of a third party channel as well. So the bottom line being that the recruitment channels that we are used to and are comfortable with might not work for us when we live in a time where the messaging that we need to communicate to the student is more complicated. It needs more institution's voice, is what I'd like to say. The messaging that needs to be out there for our prospective students to listen to. Vinay spoke about diversity, and I'd say if we keep doing what we are doing, diversity will suffer a lot. Some of the policies that have been changed also have impacted diversity, I would say. The spousal work permit, for example, I think that is the single biggest impact on diversity. But I think if we keep doing what we are comfortable doing, our diversity we'll go back to recruiting just from one country and one region in that country, right? So, and that is my biggest fear for Canada as a brand for the institutions that Canada has. Well, our recruitment strategy overall needs to move from numbers to quality, but quality has different connotations. So if you're a public college, quality has a different connotation for you than if you're a research-focused university. Quality has a different connotation for you. But in essence, that's what needs to happen. That's what will happen as well. We've been pushing out this message through our agent partners, and they've done a tremendous job of pushing out the message. But we need to focus on our pull factors going forward. And I think that is inherent strengths in our messaging and in our offerings is what the focus needs to be going forward.
Great insights, Saurabh. So thank you so much. I've been so excited for this conversation. It's a real, like, pointed questions, real answers. And we've got some questions coming in and comments from the audience as well. And we've got some faculty members in the room, and not all feel that the current model of recruitment is working. And I say, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, if you're asking me, like, yeah. I would say depends on who you are, right? Like, if you were looking at just numbers, the current model has worked well. But as a faculty member, you would not be looking at numbers. You'd be looking at how good a fit these students are to your classroom. And I would say I believe in the Canadian brand very, very deeply. I'm a product of the Canadian education industry. But yeah, there are definitely things that we've not done well. And that's why in a lot of places, government took control out of our hands, right? That's what happened in the last 6 months. And if we continue doing what we're doing, more of this is going to happen as well, is my estimation.
Yeah, and exactly. And you mentioned moving out of your comfort zone, and you've got agreement in the House as well with that comment. It's one of our guests has said, if we keep doing what we're comfortable with, diversity will suffer. Right, so moving out of our comfort zone. And another comment, for institutions, we shall scrutinize more reliance on public institutional partnerships and other institutional pilot programs, overseas curriculum, deliverance, and MOUs. And I want to sort of go off that comment a little bit and talk about some regulatory changes, especially some recent ones that we've seen. And Andrew, I'm going to put this question to you, if I may. How have some of these recent regulatory changes impacted international education as an industry? And what future regulatory trends should institutions be preparing for?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. I mean, I think I would just like to start off by saying that I certainly feel that institutions, colleges, and universities in Canada are under a tremendous amount of pressure. I think back to the work that we did throughout the pandemic, a lot of engagement with the government of Canada, a lot of relatively quick policy decisions, rapid pace of change. But that was a context, I think, where, change was omnipresent everywhere around us. The institution was not specifically focused on international. They were really looking at the broad range of programming. How do we keep delivering for our students in a broad sense? I think we're in a context now where the focus is very much on international students, support, services, quality, and that's bringing a lot of pressure, I think, to international offices and professionals in Canada in particular. But I think, and this is sort of reflective of what I've been seeing as a bit of a shift in terms of the tone and how we've been engaging with the Government of Canada through the pandemic and now into the period that we're in now. I think we were very much in a situation where the tone and the policy developments were very much focused around this concept of facilitation, and now we're into a period where the tone is much more restrictive. I think I would like to take us back to October 2023, when Minister Miller really made what were at the time, I think, some of his first public pronouncements relating to international students in Canada. And those were really measures that were focusing on integrity. I mean, he announced at that time the launch of a letter of acceptance verification tool, which quite frankly is something that we at a national level have been advocating for quite some time. It was an obvious fix and something needed to be done. At the same time, he referenced the eventual launch of what was then being referred to as a recognized institution framework, and that a review of the postgraduate work permit program was coming. So I think the context that we're in now is sort of a continuation of those remarks back to October 2023. And I think there are often two different elements here when we engage at a federal level. There are questions around volume, and there are questions around integrity. When it comes to volume, I just want to contextualize this a little bit for those who may be less familiar with the Canadian context. At the end of 2023, Canada was home to more than 1 million study permit holders. Relative to our population, that's a very significant number. And IRCC had processed about 820,000 applications for new study permits that year. They were projecting that number would reach 1.4 million in 2027. So from a federal government perspective, I mean, they were looking at what they were referring to as unsustainable growth, and something needed to be done there. Of course, we were, a cap on intake was introduced in January. And again, that really brought provinces to the table in a very significant way, outlined a process where, attestations or provincial attestations would be allocated to provinces, then to institutions, et cetera. So this is kind of the context that we're working in. And then, of course, we're moving through some of the policy discussions now relating to the recognized institution framework and postgraduate work permit reforms. I think when we talk about the RIF, this is really a question of quality and a federal government where there is no Ministry of Education sort of pulling on the levers that it has available to it to try and show a little bit of sort of set a standard in terms of what they would expect institutions to be doing as it relates to the recruitment of international students. So this is really a sort of a quality measure. And that will sort of the process, I think, will be coming in the foreseeable future around that. When we talk about integrity, I think there are a number of other issues that are being discussed that again relate back to LOA, et cetera. But I think moving forward, we are into a situation where there will be a bit of a focus on the postgraduate work permit now. We've heard from the minister that this is something that, of course, needs to be done very delicately and very deliberately. And at a national level, that is the message that we are echoing in all of our engagement with the federal government. But I think we are, and again, these intentions have been made very clear that there is a a desire to align the postgraduate work permit a little bit more closely with labor market needs and labor market outcomes. The government of Canada would have had available to it, research and information suggesting that, individuals who had postgraduate work permits were not necessarily working in fields that were commensurate with their education, and then this is something that they feel is important to address. And at the same time, I think we are in a situation in Canada where it's been made very clear that temporary residents are being sort of brought into the overall immigration levels planning. That is an annual exercise to really set the expectations in terms of how many permanent residents Canada will be welcoming each year. That has remained stable at about 500,000 into 2026. But for the first time this fall, Canada will be setting targets for the number of temporary residents. That, of course, includes international students, and the cap is addressing that. But also includes, postgraduate work permit holders, temporary foreign workers, et cetera. So there is a larger conversation that will be happening around those objectives that, quite frankly, are quite significant in a Canadian context. They will need to be looking at reductions that are relatively proportionate to about 1.5% of the Canadian population. So I think this is the context that we're in. I would say at this point, and the minister would have echoed some of these comments in recent statements, but we are likely going to be living with this cap for the foreseeable future. Whether that is this government or a potential change in government, I think this is the context under which the international education industry will need to adapt and continue to innovate and find solutions. And again, really focusing on quality student experiences.
Andrew, thanks so much. And I really appreciate you bringing the data piece into this as well. And I'd like to stick with policy just a little bit longer too, because we have a follow-up question from the audience wanting to know, gentlemen, what's your opinion on this? Given the recent policy changes, to what extent do you feel it will influence provinces to address the decreased spending in the PSI sector, and to what extent will institutions have to fill revenue gaps on their own if these numbers decline? Looking for your opinion on this.
Yeah, well, I can just sort of continue on, and I think we have to acknowledge that there have been systemic issues in Canada with regards to the public funding of our post-secondary institutions at provincial levels, and this has played out in very different ways across the different provinces. I'm not a statistician, but you can see perhaps some correlations between how aggressive some institutions were in terms of their recruitment based on the level of funding that was available from their provincial government. And just to put that into perspective, there are colleges in Ontario, for example, and it ranges, but in some cases would receive less than 20% of their operating budget from publicly funded sources. And that compares, quite significantly, for example, to colleges or cégeps in Quebec, where that number is well above 50%. And so you kind of see the incentives could be playing out differently depending on the relationship and the funding relationship that exists at the provincial level.
I've asked you all to bring out your crystal balls, if you will, and really have asked the audience to do the same. And our second poll question is a crystal ball question for you all in the audience. And how, if you haven't answered yet, if you could weigh in on this and how you anticipate the number of international students will change in the next 2 to 3 years. So if you haven't yet weighed in, we're going to get to that shortly. But for a moment, let's move away from Canada briefly, if we will, because Vinay, I want to talk a bit about Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, because you have a presence across these locations. And I want to know what you think students feel about all these changes and what their biggest needs are.
Thanks, Maureen. I think I want to bring it, refer to what Andrew was saying. In some ways, there is a kind of correlation how people are perceiving this information and, different regions. Generally speaking, I think there is, I think, a misconception that, the students are coming for PR. I think this is something that I hear from, a lot of my colleagues in the sector. What international students everywhere are interested is the labor market access. It's not linked to PR. So I don't really see, having a high number of students with work permits. How is, links to the immigration policy? I think David in the audience also kind of asked something of that sort. I think if you look at, countries in Middle East, if you look at Singapore, if you look at US, there are, you know hundreds of thousands of people with on H1 visa waiting for 20 years for immigration. They never get it, and they're happy with that. Like, it's not that they don't want to come to US. You look at Singapore, never offers PR. Middle East, people stay generations without having access to permanent residency, and they still keep on working as long as there are jobs. So I do agree that there should be linkage with the labor market, with the kind of students that we are producing from our higher education system. And But I don't really see that immigration policy and the PR, like the current regime, needs to be tweaked. I think the tweak needs to be more internal, trying to have the right programs. And what we did wrong last few years was just create programs which did not have demand. And there's a better way to address that than tweaking the policy that has really, served us so well in the last, 15 years, right? So that's. But if you look at the students, they're looking at, the return of investment. So they will look at, if there's a diploma and you have to invest, let's say, $50,000 to, do a diploma. The job you get is 40,000. It is way more attractive than if you have to spend 100,000 or $150,000 on a degree, and you still get a $60,000 job. Maybe, so different every program. So you cannot just say that this university or this college is going to have a better ROI. You'll have to look at the program level and then decide which is more attractive for international students, because we are not really competing against other universities, other countries. So, again, this is something that a lot of institutions would think, that we are competing with UK and Australia and US. But the bigger competition that right now Canada is facing is with the institutions in the home countries. So students from Philippines are looking at an option of going to Canada or staying back in Philippines. It's not that they are looking at going to Australia instead of. There's no other countries kind of expanding right now. So right now the competition is, what is the ROI of staying, and what are the long-term prospects of staying in their own country versus if they were to go out and come to Canada. And if you start discussing that and look at those numbers, then you definitely, every region is very similar. The differences might be that the South Asian students are much more ROI centric. uh, the students in Philippines, Vietnam, or China, they could be less. They are more risk averse, and they're also looking at more credibility of the process and more a guarantee, stability and all those things. uh, and in students in Africa probably have their own domestic compulsions to be looking out. So there could be a different kind of way they are looking at it, but in the end, they all look at the same, ROI factor and access to labor market. So I think there's a similarity in how the students kind of make those decisions. But then you have to also look at their own domestic factors and also their psychology to be able to see what works for them.
A lot of agreement with your statements in the chat as well, and a lot of really interesting comments and commentary going on in the chat as well. And I'd love to invite you to ask your questions in the question and answer icon. I see some great questions, but the conversation is moving so fast and it's so interesting, and they're flying up. So if you can ask your questions in that question and answer box, keep the conversations going. And welcome for those who are just joining us. And I see that Nigeria is in the room as well, and Toronto joining too. So I want to talk again. I know we've talked a lot about policy, but I think this is really, this is central to the conversation that we're having together. So Andrew, could you talk to us about competition from other English-speaking destinations for Canada from a policy perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think when we talk about competition, we have to first kind of look at the situation at home and where we are relative to where we were. And of course, you know, one of the unintended consequences of some of the policy changes and the speed at which some of this has been happening is that Canada's brand has certainly taken a hit. I mean, we look at what happened through February and March, where effectively, for college and undergraduate programs, students who were sort of midstream in the process looking to come to Canada were not able to apply for their study permit while provinces were organizing themselves around their PAL systems. I mean, these are real impacts on real individuals, and that reverberates, very clearly throughout the market. I think what we see at a national level, and I mean, you're all experiencing it firsthand, but we're really starting to see some more empirical evidence of what is a softening of demand. Now, how persistent that will be be up for debate, but we certainly see a situation, and we saw this from the very beginning, that we may very much not meet the cap that was set for us this year. So there will be a rebuilding phase. There's no doubt about that. And again, it comes back to some of the previous comments around collaboration, being innovative, and maybe taking a little bit more ownership as a sector for the messaging that we're putting out and how we're promoting ourselves. But it is also a very interesting time for some of our key competitor countries, where unfortunately Canada is a bit of a leader in the CAP space at the moment, where we've seen similar initiatives, of course, probably implemented in a very different way in Australia, and conversations around this now coming to the forefront in the United Kingdom. We're all sort of experiencing similar challenges when it comes to affordability, when it comes to housing, productivity. I mean, these things are not unique to Canada. I think perhaps what is the big unknown at the moment is the relative position of the United States in all of this. I mean, I think we see that the sector there is really trying to organize itself at a more federal level, really calling for a more integrated strategy and approach to supporting the recruitment of students or international education more generally. Yet there's a context where there will obviously be some uncertainty around the election in November and what might come of that. So I think there are a lot of things that really make it very difficult to predict exactly where we're going to end up this year. But I would say that if I had to guess, there will be some space in terms of that, in terms of reaching that cap. And these are the conversations that we've been really having at a federal level, trying to work with the department to remove barriers as much as possible to really maximize the number of students that we can get to Canada under that cap space. And again, working around some very basic principles relating to, students not being impacted for reasons that are outside of their control. I think there's a lot of concern about some of this out in the sector right now, and I can assure you that at a federal level, there is we're absolutely united around this principle. So these are some of the things that some of the messaging that is being delivered and discussed here in Ottawa.
Yeah, well, our audience would agree with you when in terms of those numbers and that gap still having some space there, because over 51% of the folks in the room who have voted on the second poll, they've indicated they anticipate the number of international students will decrease by at least a quarter in the next couple of years. So we know lots of things still at play. We have some elections coming up in different places, in a number of places that will certainly all play into what these numbers look like over the next 2 to 3 years. So let's get into some of the strategies then, shall we? Sarah, given all of this policy, all of these numbers, the data that we've talked about, the trends that we're seeing, the predictions for the future, how can institutions ensure that the recruitment process not only attracts students, but also sets the stage for a positive and supportive student experience once they arrive?
Yeah, absolutely. Maureen, so I think I think the a successful student outcome starts from the first step of prospecting the right students, right? So it's not you create a successful student only by what happens in the institution, only by the education experience. It also starts from what are you communicating, who are you communicating with at the front end of things. So I think the success of an eventual graduate starts at the first step of recruitment, right? So I'm a very strong believer in that concept. So if that is true, I believe that, and institutions already do a lot in terms of communicating with students to help them prepare and all that. But I think what we need to do is step back a little and say, but the attracting piece, like, so when we are attracting the students, what is the content we are sending out? And Winnie and Andrew both were talking about, delinking immigration and labor market, and those all things are relevant. Those are things that institutions have already said that we are giving you an education experience, great education, and access to labor market. So those two things, those are the things which matter to students. But somewhere down the line, the messaging has shifted to it's all about immigration, for example. It is about immigration for many students, for sure, but the messaging is not. That happens. That's a byproduct of if we give students a great education experience and access to labor market. And I think the problem in all this is institutions are not in have not remained in control of the messaging. The messaging, a lot of it has been managed by our intermediaries across the world. And what needs to happen, I think, more of is institutions need to be more in charge of their messaging, of their funnel. And I read some comments as well saying this is the ideal case scenario, but without resources, institutions can't really do more. And I would agree 100%. Coming from an institution, there is so much already that needs to be done in institutions that there isn't any capacity to do more with the same resources that we have. But I do believe that there are innovative ways we can implement giving students the right kind of information, one, but also in the way that they want to consume that information, right? I think we also, so this is my marketing head talking, we are talking about students who are making one of the biggest decisions of their life. And imagine if any of our panelists have been in an education fair, imagine how that happens. It's so chaotic. Hundreds of students coming and taking information from the institution. Now think about a BMW sale that happens, right? And I'm not comparing education to selling an automobile, but think about the experience that someone goes through there. That is what we need to shift towards. When the numbers are down, the demand is down, but supply is down too, and we want to attract better suited students, for example, that is what the experience of the student needs to shift to. They want to have more deeper conversations. It's no more about general. It's about specifics, labor market, city, whatever that might be about. And that's some of the work that we've done at Student Direct with some of our partners too. We've created specific modules that students go through before coming to an institution as well. But I would also like to say that institutions have to think about what students want. And I think whenever I talk to students, when I look at these awesome surveys that Edified conducts, one thing that most students want is they want to talk to institutions directly. That's what they want more of. And I also believe institutions have the most relevant information that students need. That is the way to do it. The problem is the resources. The problem is institutions don't have the bandwidth to do more of this. And that's something that we need to figure out how to do that better, how to make sure that experience for the student is once in a lifetime experience, both in terms of getting the information as well as getting the right kind of information at the right stage of their education journey. I just go to random websites of institutions and trying to contact people. I look at their appointment calendars. And that's what, when it comes to resources, appointment calendars are full for the next month, for next 2 months, when students want to directly talk to an institution. And that's what the challenge is with the resources within the institutions. And that's something that I'm working with some of our partners to solve for them, so that students can hear from the people they want to hear from.
Yeah, I really appreciate you framing the student experience as that continuum, because so often that the focus, when we talk about student experience, the focus is when they're already in the seat, when they're already in the chair, and they're in the classrooms and learning. But really, from that first interaction, and what type of message are you getting across, and how you're getting your message across, and where you're getting your message across, and how that has changed over the years. And so I'm going to, listen, I've got so many more questions that I would love to ask you, and I intend on doing that, even if it's after this webinar. But I'm being cognizant of time, and I want to get to some of the audience questions. And this goes along with what you were just talking about, Saurabh. So I'll put this out to everyone. But have any of you observed or expect to see Canadian colleges and institutions pivoting their recruitment strategies? And some of this, we're talking about the study permit caps, but how are they making these changes? And your student experience is one example. Do you have some others?
I think it's about intent right now. To be honest, I think Saurabh mentioned this, or that there will be some institutions who will pivot, and they will do really well, and then most of the institutions will not do well, because I think there is in a lot of institutions, international student is like an afterthought. It's trying to plug a hole in the budget. Like, they need international students for the wrong reasons in some cases. You need international students for bringing in diversity of thought in your classrooms. You need international students, to enrich, your own domestic students. And there's the so I think if you are going with that intention, it's a very different way you are going to find students, how you are going to support students, and also it's about the investment that you're making in this whole process. So we know that international students pay far more than domestic students. So if you look at that additional budget, some of that has to be plugged in back into providing support services to international students, and make it a standalone kind of dealing it from domestic budgets. Do it for the right reasons. You're bringing them, take care of them, build it for future. Because this is the future of Canada, right? It's not the future of your own institution. This is the future of the world. People working together, collaborating. So if you're doing it for that reason, your way to approach the recruitment would be very different. And I agree with almost everything that Saurabh has been saying. And I look at other industries also evolving in the same way. There's aviation sector, for example. After oil shock, there's a lot of mergers. There's a lot of unprofitable airlines closed down. But then what emerged was more partnerships, more code sharing. Things like upgrading, like a lot of I'm not talking about the customer experience at airlines, that is horrible, but other things that they have done innovatively, right? So to make sure that they know their customer better than the customer knows themselves. That is how the marketing in other industries has evolved. Look at any big brand, whether it's Walmart or a Costco, the amount of time they spend to get to know their customers. I think institutions need to get in that same framework for domestic students as well as international students. What do they want? And from the money that we are getting from them, how do we reinvest to make their whole experience, whole journey with us better? Because that's what they are going to remember the rest of their lives, right? The whole journey, not just the small part of it. They'll get jobs, probably move on, have a good life, but then you don't credit your institution unless you really enjoyed and had a wonderful journey. So those memories are important, and I think that's what the institution need to work on, making those memories.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing us back to the topic. In fact, the title of this conversation about future proofing. So I want to put this out to all three of you, if you would. So what measures should institutions take to be ready for the future and ensure accountability and transparency in their recruitment practices?
So I'll let Sarah and Vinay talk more specifically about the recruitment aspect of things. I would just like to make a couple quick points around, partly related to your previous question, Maureen, but really I think what we've seen and what I certainly hear from institutions is that there's a lot of looking at the internal processes, ways of doing business, how we go about our recruitment strategies. And I think there are some interesting opportunities, efficiencies, and ways to kind of look at students, not necessarily from a first in, first out kind of perspective, but really trying to find the best fit students for the programs, your institution, et cetera. But otherwise, I think this is an opportunity for institutions to really look, and many do this, but look at international from a more comprehensive way. So it's not just about recruiting international students. We're trying to graduate globally skilled, globally competent, individuals. That includes creating opportunities for Canadian students to go abroad, looking at ways to bring Canadian education overseas, contract training, transnational education. I mean, there's a whole suite of things that I think institutions are perhaps reflecting on, and international offices are perhaps reflecting on in a slightly different way, given this context. And I think diversifying the sources of revenue that are available is one way to kind of future-proof the institution and the international work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What would you like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say never waste a good crisis. I think Winston Churchill said that, right? And I think there are a lot of crises right now, not just one, there are on different fronts, right? 6 months ago, we thought the supply is constrained, that's the problem, but now demand is constrained for more than supply is constrained. So I think there are a lot of, I look at crisis, tough times, but also opportunities, right? I think crises are a good way of giving a rethink to what we've been doing. What can we do better? Some things if in the public sector, there are many things we can't really change overnight or even in a quarter or two, right? But there are things that we can do. I think we have to really focus on innovation. Are there things we can do differently that we've kind of assumed this is the only way that they need to be that they will be done? I think those are the kind of things that we need to think about as institutions, and we also need to think about our student life cycle, right? What are the most important points in their life cycle that we are talking to them, that we're interacting with them, and how can we utilize technology? I always say this: we need to utilize technology to kind of automate high volume, low value interactions, but have people in charge of low volume, high value interactions. I think if we can do this, if institutions can do this, they can figure out how to use the limited resources they have in the right kind of conversations. I think that's something that we need. If we can figure out, if as institutions we can figure out, we will make sure that we have the kind of welcoming messaging that as a country we've been welcoming, but has our messaging been welcoming, or we've just made it a process in the last few years? So we can ensure we keep doing that while utilizing technology for the other operational interactions, which are very high in volume. So that'll be my 2 cents on that.
Thank you so much.
I think that I know the time is running out. I think we need courageous leadership right now here to think beyond the crisis. So it's not about doing what we are going to do in the next 2 years. It's about thinking where we are all going to be 5 years, 10 years down the line, and start working on that. I think that is going to make a big difference. And whether it's investing in the technologies or being ready, as I said, the technology moves faster. We are probably not going to catch up, but we know at some point that we are going to meet the next level of innovation, whether it's AI. So just get ready. Don't be afraid of this crisis. Just start thinking beyond the crisis and start investing for the future, and rather than cutting costs in short term.
Fantastic. So to recap, and these are just some brief notes that I've been taking as you've been talking. So some of the key points that I will take away from this conversation today is really reframing crises as opportunities, and in order to foster resilience, harness innovation and collaboration, and really consider that entire student life cycle when considering the student experience. And harnessing the power of technology, using your resources creatively, and concentrate on your messaging and what that looks like now, and how and where you're getting your message across. And perhaps one of the very last things that you said is going to really stick with me, Vinay, and that's about courageous leadership. So I'd like to thank you all for your leadership in the sector, for walking us through this process over the past hour today. We're just on time right now. So unfortunately, we didn't get to every single question, but I encourage you all to click on the green tab at the bottom of your screen to learn more about direct student recruitment through Student Direct. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your wisdom, for your time today. And if you'd like to learn more about Student Direct, please do reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maureen. I think it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for being such a great host today. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Saurabh and
Thank you, Maureen. Thanks, everyone.